She's president of Graziano Associates, which helps fast-growing mid-market and larger companies in business-to-business market capitalize on customer and employee interactions to deepen loyalty, improve engagement, and support sustainable growth, which I think we'd all like to be part of. She's a leading authority in the area, a strategic thinker and leader with over 28 years of business experience. She's the author of numerous articles on customer experience, employee experience, and client retention. And today she'll address why CX is projected to be the #1 marketing trend of 2016 and why it is not a nice-to-have approach. It's critical to long-term business success across all industries. So please welcome Denise Graziano.
A couple of months ago, Forbes identified that customer experience would be the #1 marketing trend this year. About a month later, IBM said it would be the #2 trend. Earlier in the year, a Gartner study reported that 89% of companies expect to compete mostly on the basis of customer experience this year. That's a lot of pressure. So, there are a number of reasons for why this is occurring. And we are at an unprecedented level of education, information, and reviews that are accessible to consumers of all types. They have with social media, they have a platform and a voice that they've never had, and they're not afraid to share their opinions, whether positive or negative. Of course, we all want and deserve a good customer experience, but I don't know if you're aware that by reducing your customer defection rate by only 5% can increase profitability anywhere from 25 to 95%. That's extraordinary. And what it stresses is that we have to really make client retention of the utmost importance to us. Unfortunately, though, the exact opposite often happens. And very often that happens during periods of rapid growth, where a company either can't keep up with the volume, they don't hire very well, they may not train very well, or they start to cut corners. Think about your own best-kept secret, a favorite restaurant, a bakery, an online service provider, a business vendor. Somebody that you absolutely love working with, and you want them to succeed because you want them to be there for you. And then they do, and they grow. And then you check in a little while later, and something about it's different. You notice that something about what made them great got lost. That experience has changed. And then that leads to, I'll just stand back here. That leads to, it takes its toll on growth and revenue. And you can see in this chart where customer experience can start to decline and revenue can still start to rise for a period of time. But then they'll both start to tail off. And unless corrections are made, that's the pattern that will stick. Now, there are a number of common reasons why many companies, I should say, are not successful when they attempt to address customer experience on their own. And I'll give you 5 common ones. Number 1 is that some companies and executives simply don't understand what customer experience is. It's a big term. It has a lot of moving parts, and so they do nothing. Number 2 is that some companies will say, okay, you know what, we'll throw a little bit of money at it, and we'll see what happens. But that's like putting a Band-Aid on a huge gash, and you have to tailor your approach to the situation at hand, and it can't be a short-term approach. It has to be something that's ongoing. A third common situation is that companies might say, okay, we're going to keep an eye on our competitors or similar-sized companies, and we'll do what they do. And again, that's never going to work in the long term because your customer's experience is specific to your company, and you have to take measures that match that. The fourth reason, and this is really simply misguided thinking, is that some companies might say, well, you know what, we're in an industry that's immune, or we're in a geographic area that's immune, or we have some sort of monopoly going on. I'm here to tell you it's affecting all companies these days, B2B, B2C, large, small, higher education, healthcare, and even government is being affected by this. Now, the fifth reason that companies don't often succeed is that they just don't understand the economic impact that customer experience can have, either positively or negatively. So let's get into that. When I'm talking to companies, very often, rather than starting with what it is, I start with what it's not. And it's not just customer service, and it's not just customer engagement. Yes, they're a part of it, and in some cases a big part of it. But customer experience really is the many, many points of contact over time. And it includes both the actual interactions you have with your customers and the subconscious perception. And I'll get more into that in a moment. CX should be a very circular experience, and there's so much that's front-loaded in the pre-purchase process. Think about all the information that's out there about your organization in your own materials, distributed by your sales team, on your website, any reviews that are out there. Then if you go and exhibit at a trade show, anything that you distribute there. So, and actually there's a study that said 74% of consumers decide who they want to work with before they even talk to that company for the first time. So that pre-purchase process does matter. And everything has to be congruent throughout when you interact with your customers. They need to know what it's like to work with you in every step of interacting with you, including that pre-purchase time. Then there's the purchasing process. How does that go? The actual using of your product or service. And then any necessary follow-ups, be that maintenance, replenishment, servicing, or if there's a problem, how does that get addressed? Hopefully it goes well and the client wants to repeat the whole cycle. And if you're very lucky, then they'll take along some referrals too. In the 90s, Dr. Elizabeth Saunders came up with this very, very simple metric to measure 3 essential components of a good customer experience. And she maintained that if all 3 of these things weren't present, a client or a customer might look for alternatives. So she said it has to meet our needs, be easy to use, and be enjoyable. Now another look at that might be, is it functional? Is it accessible? And what's the emotional connection to it? And emotion does factor very heavily into customer experience too. So think about a situation where you have this financial software that generates fantastic reports, it's affordable, it's easy to use, and everything is just very easy to read. But there's a flaw in their infrastructure. And when you go to generate these reports, you can't always get them when you need them. So when that happens, instead of being enjoyable, it goes to stressful. You're not going to want to repeat something like that, and you will look for alternatives, which leads to churn. Now, churn is a term that basically is a description that says it's the loss of customers over a given period of time. As I said before, customer experience can decline and revenue will rise for a period of time. Ultimately, your goal should have revenue and customer experience rising in a parallel fashion. Now, in my years of working in this area, I've identified these 9 areas that I think all companies and organizations should be monitoring on a regular basis with respect to customer experience. I call them critical churn triggers. Any one of these, if left unchecked, can cause churn, can drive your customers away. Now, the ones that I have in bold are a little bit more dangerous because they tend to fly under the radar and they're not necessarily associated with customer experience. So for the purpose of our short forum today, I want to go through the first 4 or 5, and then we're going to introduce our panel and then pick up some of the other topics as well. So we'll start with number 1, which is perception and perspective. Don't let your own rhetoric cloud your vision. Just because you say your customers love working with you doesn't mean they agree that it's a smooth, enjoyable journey. I mean, this stat really says it all. 70% of buying experiences are based on how a customer feels they're being treated. So that goes back to that subconscious perception I mentioned a moment ago. The client's perception is the ultimate truth. So no matter what bullet list you have of how nice it is to work with you, how they respond and how they interact and how they receive it is what matters. Now, with regard to perspective, you always have to be looking at your own product or service through the eyes of your customer. And so many companies miss this. They just overlook the step and they think they know their customers well enough. But if you're not monitoring on both levels the dialogue that's going on and getting the feedback, you're missing opportunities for growth. And what I'd like to do for you today is reframe your thinking. If you've given any thought to customer experience, instead of thinking of it as an expense or a potential pitfall, I'd like you to start to think about it as potential for growth and opportunity instead. So when you hear what's going on in the minds of your customers and you can respond accordingly, you can really look for completely new avenues to expand business. Number 2 is infrastructure. Now this is an interesting one. Also flies under the radar because many times you don't think that infrastructure would impact customer experience. And this is a great example about Fidelity Investments. About 5 years ago, they discovered that their clients were having difficulty logging into their accounts. So they invested $20,000 to fix the flaw in their system. Now in and of itself, that may seem like a lot of money, but they were using those very expensive call centers. And the net savings to them was $4 million annually from a $20,000 investment. But they didn't stop there. They continued to look over the whole organization, and they discovered about 150 other areas that needed rectifying. And they invested in correcting those, and the additional savings was another $20 million annually. So when you look at your own organization and you look at a proportionate investment that you can make in your infrastructure, you can save money, you can increase revenue tremendously. So infrastructure can take so many forms. I mean, in the most basic sense, it could be if you identify clearly where your place of business is and not leave it to Google Maps. Because, you know, any kind of facilitation you can give to your customers matters. Infrastructure is not one of those things that you can set it and forget it. It needs to be monitored now and again because you don't know where a chink in the armor has occurred. Number 3 is service and conflict resolution. Now, this is an area where companies do tend to monitor, but as we all know, they don't always get it right. I'm sure every one of us can raise a hand and say that we've been on the phone for an hour with the cable company, TV company, credit card company, any one of those, satellite radio, that's one of my favorites, and not get your problem solved, right? So when that happens, now social media allows for the voice. Customer service, you can't just take a blind eye and think, well, this is just how we do business. I'll give you an example about Sprint. A few years ago, they were having a terrible situation with a lot of issues in the company, including their customer service. They too were using those expensive call centers, and they had a policy if a person called in and they didn't get their problem resolved in one try, they'd get a $50 credit. So between the $50 credits and the call centers, they were hemorrhaging money. So they came in with new management and they really tightened up how they approached things. They brought in a customer experience officer as well as some other team members. It wasn't just about experience. And they, I'm sure you have seen, they've done a good job now of trying to take back customers from all of their competitors right now. So with regard to service and conflict resolution, if you have a sales team or a service team and they use scripts, please throw them away. Scripts, all they do is infuriate customers. When you give license to your team and give them within general parameters some creative license to solve a problem, it does a couple of things. Number 1, it engages the employee. When the employee feels like they're part of the solution, they are much more effective at their job. Customer and employee experience are very much related, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Secondly, the customer feels like they're being heard and they feel like their problem is being addressed. So anytime you can do that, you're going to be much more successful. We all have to create positive experiences that build trust and loyalty, and do this on an ongoing basis whenever possible. Now, number 4 is customization, and this is an area where I think that our personal lives have sort of crossed over into our business lives. Amazon has been a big catalyst to this. If you think about when you're buying something and it's in the shopping cart, it says, if you like this, you might also like this. Or people just like you also bought these 3 items. Now, on the one hand, it's a little bit creepy, but on the other hand, it really does kind of smooth out our experience and help us define things that maybe we didn't know about. Now, in the brick and mortar environment, that's always been easier for a shop owner to get to know a customer and to help them make a buying decision. But even the big retailers have found that they are investing a lot more money online. Saks, Lord & Taylor, JCPenney, and Kohl's, all in the past several months, have increased their budgets to improve the customer experience with regard to customization, so that when their customers are buying, it's a smoother journey, they're spending more money, and the customer enjoys it more. Lay's potato chips came out last spring and said, we are going to print 10,000 custom potato chip bags. Now, every time I tell the story, it still makes me laugh because it sounds silly. But the Frito-Lay CMO came out and said, you know what? We know our demographic, and those 18 to 24-year-olds want that level of customization, interaction, and dialogue with us, and we're gonna give it to them. About, I don't know, a month ago, I heard that Oreo is doing something similar where you can color on a bag and make it your own. And then back in the fall, Budweiser came out with your customized can, so you can enjoy the game with your favorite team in your hand. And then tying it back to B2B, the trade show industry has always had a very cold, cavernous atmosphere. But even they have figured out how to harness the power of technology to improve the experience for the organizer, the exhibitors, and the attendees, all by allowing them to schedule more meaningful meetings, to find the content they want while they're there, and to make the most use of the time you're in a venue. So customization, I really challenge all of us to find a way to customize whatever we can for our customers, because everybody's looking to have things done the way they want it, when they want it. And we have to respond. We all have to try to exceed expectations whenever possible. This study said that 86% of buyers would pay more for a better customer experience, but only 1% felt that there was something to buy. So that just says that there's tremendous room for growth. Which leads me to number 5, which is value over price. We always have to create an experience that the client wouldn't mind paying more for. I mean, think of all the luxury brands that you interact with, and you don't mind paying more for that. And this is Don, I'd love to introduce the panel now so that we can kind of say Christian can talk about this, and we'll lead into the other segments of the presentation.
Excellent.
Our brains are wired to remember stories, and so when there's a beginning, middle, and an end, and you can change that end from the negative review and put a positive spin on it, that's what we're tending to remember, and so that's how you can save a bad experience. So I think there's a danger in that, because you can get caught up in it and you feel like you have to constantly add, but if you can't sustain that growth, then it's definitely not going to serve the company. So sometimes the experience has to be, again, it starts at the very beginning. It's every bit of interacting with your customers, and it's a whole perception. I'm working with a company right now. It's a technology company, and they're actually about to launch something very large, and they are trying to look at things from the smallest detail about how the employees interact, what they wear, how they say things. And so when you can almost fall back on that area of the experience to improve it, instead of constantly having to improve something or introduce something new. Because if you can't keep up with it, then it's not going to work. If you are able to produce that and constantly come up with new products, then fine. But otherwise, go with your strengths. Instead of being so focused on numbers and what people say, I mean, it really is about what you do with it and how you interact with them. So by taking that negative and turning it back into a positive, it makes all the world a difference. And it takes a level of commitment by any organization to do that. You know, another reason why customer experience efforts fail is that it's a lot of work. It really is. It's something that you have to monitor on an ongoing basis, and unless you're willing to do that, it will be, you know, short-term success, or you know, you can definitely leave yourself open to losing customers.
Denise, maybe you can sum up for us what we talked about today.
I think that again, this is something that's here. It's now. It's something that we have to respond to. The problem is that most companies don't have strategy to get started, so they don't know where to begin. Hopefully, all of our comments have kind of given you a framework to kind of think about different aspects of your company or your organization to take some steps. And that's the first step. I start somewhere. Just continue to talk about it, nothing will get accomplished. So I just encourage everybody to take one aspect of the company and start to take some steps to get a hold of this experience.